car crashes, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts with the attorneys of Hollis, Wright.
Good evening and welcome to The Attorneys. I'm your host, Art Franklin, and tonight we're addressing a very sensitive but very crucial topic. We're talking about divorce and dying. Yes, I said divorce and dying, but Jennifer Trumbello is going to get into that, and we got all the answers for you. As we get started, though, we want to remind you that attorneys at Hollis Wright are standing by right now. We always start off the show making sure someone's in place so they can answer your call at 1-844-LAW-TALK. That's 1-844-LAW-TALK. It is a free and confidential call. I'd like to tell you that from the top of the show. Josh Wright is here, of course, and it's good to see you, my friend.
Absolutely. Great to see you, too. All right, so one of these is guaranteed to happen.
Yes.
Death for all of us. Divorce, maybe not.
Hopefully not.
For some, it may. But we're going to be talking about the interplay between the two today and just kind of generally some things that you need to do to protect yourself when you get to the point when you're going to pass away, planning you can do, and also how that's implicated in divorces and divorce proceedings and whatnot. All right, Jennifer.
Yes.
Tell us about, how did you get in? I think, honestly, we've done close to 650 shows. I've never done a show on death and divorce together. Tell me how you got into this area and came up with this topic. It's great, and I want to hear about your practice, too.
Yes, absolutely. So I have a small law firm in Bluff Park in the Hoover area. I've been there about 11 years, and my main focus has always been family law and then also probate. The two go hand in hand quite often, and we see a lot of the same issues arise in both.
So when I kind of reviewed some of the pre-production stuff related to this show, I did not realize how these things interplay with one another a lot. I mean, it can be as simple as, someone passes away and they were already divorced, and what impact does their will that was not amended before their death, maybe the death was sudden, what impact will that have on a ex-spouse? All these things interplay with one another, and it's why probate is complicated work.
It is, and they do arise at the same time. Over the course of the last several years, we've had a lot of these issues arise. People are more tuned into doing their estate planning, to making sure that their families are protected and cared for upon their passing.
Let's talk just in general terms, because I know you do a lot of this work. How important is it to be able to sit down with someone like yourself in order to generally do estate planning early, as opposed to waiting until it's too late?
Absolutely. So a lot of people will say, I don't need a will. I don't have much of an estate, or my children are almost grown. Now, obviously, it's very important to do a will when you have minor children. You want to name a guardian in that, who's going to care for your children, who is going to be in charge of their funds and any money that could be coming to them, specifically Social Security. So there's just a lot of issues that need to be focused on. A lot of times people will do their estate planning and have everything in place, and then certain life circumstances will come up to where it changes that. And a lot of people just end up not going back and amending that will or those life insurance beneficiaries.
Good point.
And one of those is what I think we started on, and let's talk about someone passes away during a divorce. How does that affect inheritance rights?
So actually, the state of Alabama has tried to account for that. They have passed some statutory law that does say when you go through a divorce and the divorce is completed prior to the other spouse's death, so the full divorce, the parties are no longer married, that divorce effectively revokes any will provision that left that estate to the now ex-spouse.
So I hear that, and I understand what you're saying, but you would still agree that when a life circumstance as significant as a divorce happens, someone needs to come to a lawyer like you to say, hey, look, I need to make adjustments and evaluate things like my will and my estate. Because here's the deal, like you may totally want to redirect to a new spouse. You may totally want to redirect to your children. You may want to impact what's happening with the home that you owned. Like life changes require estate planning adjustments. Is that fair?
Absolutely, okay. Absolutely. And there are other tools that you can utilize. There is wills, there are prenuptial and postnuptial agreements, and also trusts that can kind of account for those blended families and some of those life-changing circumstances.
Talk a little bit about prenuptials and postnuptials and kind of how this interplays with our topic today.
Yeah, so a prenuptial is done prior to the marriage, and a postnuptial is done after the marriage. Both are perfectly valid and enforceable, assuming that they were created with the necessary terms.
There are a lot of different circumstances someone would want a prenup. It's not just related specifically to financial resources. Sometimes it may be a blended family, or someone already owns a home and has owned a home for 30 years but is rolling into a new marriage with new children. I mean, there are a lot of reasons. Like sometimes prenups, I think, get a bad stereotype associated with them, but the reality is sometimes it's just a contract being put in place to make sure that certain assets are properly defined.
That's right. It will separate each spouse's assets so that they each have their own separate estates, and then they are able to then dispose of it and distribute it to where they would like it to go. Yeah. And then you also have the marital property, which would be anything acquired after that date of marriage that would be considered both spouses, that you can then distribute to whomever you wish.
How do how do you see the divorce bar right now, and just kind of generally the family court judges in Jefferson County? I've seen some really positive things in Jefferson County. Do you see it the same way? I mean, is our family court in pretty good shape right now?
So family court is in pretty good shape. That is utilized quite a bit. And then we also have a domestic relations courthouse and judges. And we have a couple of new judges on the bench. Everyone is really fair, and they have done a very good job with moving the cases along. So there is not a lot of backlog right now in Jefferson County, which is amazing considering the amount of people who live in this county and how many divorces are filed every year.
Yeah, and so you've been doing, even though you do a lot of probate-based work, you've been doing divorces for years too.
I have 11 years now.
Okay.
I have been doing both areas.
One of the things, I know we're getting ready to go to break, but one of the things I want to talk about with Jennifer when we come back is just in general terms, if someone is going through a divorce, the things that you need to look at to make sure that you've got your planning correct in order to make sure that whatever your expectations and your plans are for your estate, that they're properly protected in a way that you can allocate them to your children or to other family members, and just the things you need to look at. Some people sometimes will look at it and just say, well, I've got a divorce, I'm done with that, and let's move on and go to the next step. But there are some planning involved. We talked about a little bit of it, but I want to unwrap some more when we come back.
Does that also include wills?
Sure.
During the divorce as well?
Absolutely.
So that means we got a lot to talk about when we come back. As you heard Josh kind of teeing things up for us there, including wills. And if there's some things that you want to talk about, make a simple call, 1-844-LAW TALK. There's an attorney from Hollis, Wright. In fact, there are several attorneys at Hollis, Wright standing by right now to take your call. It's a free and confidential call. We are speaking with Jennifer Trombulla, and we'll continue that conversation with divorce and dying. That sounds like a reality show, right? If these things do happen. Stay with us. We'll be back on The Attorneys right after this.
Here's some good information from our firm to you. Hollis Wright recently launched the Law Talk podcast. With podcasts becoming so popular, this will be a simple way to provide our loyal viewers with more opportunities to access information about important legal topics and to learn more about our firm and how we can help you if the need ever arises. There are many ways to access the Law Talk podcast. You can simply scan the QR code on your screen. Also, episodes are always available on the Hollis Wright YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your podcasts. Just search up Hollis Wright in the Law Talk podcast. Don't wait, take advantage and listen today. Thanks for watching The Attorneys, and we know you'll enjoy the Law Talk podcast.
The Attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you.
When we started the show in 2011, my goal was to do what our firm does best. Help people answer questions related to real-world legal issues they have in their lives in a way that's not intimidating to talk with a lawyer. If the issue is important to you, it's equally important to us, and we're ready to talk with you at no cost.
Yeah, oftentimes people are confronting various legal issues in their lives that really run the gamut of a lot of different legal practice areas such as bankruptcy, criminal law, civil law such as personal injury, divorces, domestic relations. And to be able to have a show once a week that covers those practice areas and answers people's questions in those areas, that's really the main objective of the show.
We use the resources of the many lawyers at our law firm to create a plan that has a lasting impact for each person that calls or texts. And we also give back to the community at the same time. We are here to serve you, the viewer, each week on The Attorneys.
Addiction kills hope.
But at Bradford, it all changes here.
Experience the difference
that proven treatment can make.
Find recovery. Find community.
at Bradford.
Welcome back. You're watching The Attorneys, and we're dealing with a sensitive subject, talking about divorce and dying. But we've got the right expert here to help us navigate through that. Jennifer Trembella, she's here to talk about that. I want to remind you to follow Hollis Wright on all social media platforms, on X, on Instagram, on Facebook. You get some really good content throughout the week. Get to see some of the stuff that Josh and Carter do as well. Got to make sure you check that out. Jennifer, I want to talk to you about wills, and when people are filing for wills during a divorce, I thought there were some common mistakes, but you said not really common mistakes, but things you need to do right.
Yes, typically people will just neglect to update their will either when they go through a divorce or when they get remarried and have a new spouse. And so sometimes the old spouse is mentioned in the will and not the current spouse. And then what do you do?
Well, and what do you do in that circumstance? It sounds like the law kind of gap fills right there. If you made a mistake and you didn't update and you pass away, for example, does the new spouse have the ability to potentially take a share, or is that just a litigated issue that has to be decided with lawyers?
Well, it will definitely be a litigated issue. However, upon the divorce, the final order of divorce, that effectively revokes the will portion that left everything to that now ex-spouse.
Okay. Let's talk for a second about what's called omitted share. I've heard about this concept. How does that work in the law generally if someone tries to omit their spouse or children in a will, maybe because they're, not living with that person, don't have a relationship, but they're still formally married? Can you do those things?
You cannot. My favorite thing to tell people is you can disinherit your children, but you cannot disinherit your spouse. So the law actually provides for what's called an omitted spouse share or elective share. So if you leave your spouse less than what the Alabama Code has provided that they are entitled to take off of the top of your estate, they can actually file for this omitted spouse share and receive the statutory allowances under the code.
And as it relates to statutory allowances, are there certain numbers that are applicable, like certain thresholds that the court allows?
There are, and it is actually updated every 3 years. The current numbers we are working off of are from April 1st of 2024.
Okay.
So we have what's called a homestead allowance, and that is $18,850. So if you lived with the deceased person, you are entitled to a homestead allowance. There is also a personal property exemption of $9,425 and a family allowance of $18,850. So the total, if you were living with the deceased and omitted from their will as their spouse, that's a total of $47,125.
So that obviously changes, and that metric changes yearly or every 3 years. And that's not something you need to try and handle on your own, though. Like, you would file with a lawyer an omitted share request, right?
Correct, correct. You file a petition to receive your elective share of that will. And just stating that you were omitted as a spouse, you may have to file a copy of your marriage license just to prove to the court that you were in fact legally married.
All right, one of the things I want to ask about is this. A divorce decree, when the court issues an order and lays out certain things in that divorce decree, that really can control a lot of what happens on a moving forward basis. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yes. So the divorce can happen one of two ways, either by marital settlement agreement, where both parties go through each of the issues and decide amongst themselves that this is what they want. The other option is, if you cannot agree and you must take it to trial, the judge will decide for you. But typically in both of those circumstances, there are going to be clauses in that final decree that state you are, from this point forward, waiving all rights to inheritance, to pension, to the estate of the other person.
If that divorce decree indicates at death, for example, because maybe someone was married for 35 years and then got divorced, you get a portion of the 401k, you get a portion of the death benefits. Those things also would control, would they not?
Correct. And a lot of times pensions for these longer term marriages, people who are married 20, 30 plus years, that spouse is going to be the only one who is able to inherit the pension from the other spouse.
You know, this is a shining example of changing circumstances in your life can have a major impact on what happens to your resources at your passing, how that impacts things like life insurance, disability policies, pensions, 401ks. It's a reason you want to get to someone like Jennifer.
And I'm glad you mentioned life insurance, and by now you notice that we're talking about divorce and dying, two topics you don't always hear together, but something that Jennifer Trombello can actually give us some expert advice on. So, are life insurance policies treated differently if someone dies during the divorce proceedings?
So that also depends. If you are still currently married and you have not yet received that final judgment of divorce, in the eyes of the law, you are still married. So you are still the spouse of the deceased and you can inherit from them either under the beneficiary policy of a life insurance policy or under their will.
A lot of that, though, will be impacted on who pays for and who owns that policy and who the named insured is, right?
That's correct. So the law tries to account for that, and again, upon divorce, that life insurance beneficiary is effectively revoked. But there are some cases where they would still be allowed to be that beneficiary and it would not be revoked as to that ex-spouse.
Yeah, and I've seen circumstances where someone tries to be cute and they try and remove a spouse from a life insurance policy and then they pass away and there's an argument and dispute over whether or not that life insurance policy should have flowed through the will to that individual or it flows outside the estate. So it can get complicated. Tell us this, and I think this is important. Someone's sitting on the couch and they say, look, I've had some changed circumstances in my life, and before I pass away, I want to make sure I've got it right. What do you normally advise them? Like when you sit down with someone the first time, what do they have to bring to you? What are you evaluating? What is your eye looking at to determine what changed circumstances someone's had in life to make adjustments for them?
So I will always ask for any previous wills or estate planning documents so that we can review those on their face and see what needs to be changed. If there has been a divorce, I always need to see that divorce settlement agreement or the judge's final order to see what, if any, provisions were waived in that divorce agreement.
Yeah, and that's really important when you think about it, like sitting down with someone, and I know you do initial consultations where you're not charging people to evaluate, hey, you either do or you do not need a lawyer. You may need to make changes, you may not need to make changes. When we come back, because I know we're going to our final break, but I want to talk a little bit with Jennifer when we come back about the kind of the most important things she sees, the biggest mistakes that people make, and how they can be fixed.
Good stuff. All right. We still got more. You're watching The Attorneys, and we, of course, talking with Jennifer Trombello, an expert, when we're talking about divorce and dying. I know it sounds like a soap opera or a reality show, but this is real life, and you're getting real answers here on The Attorneys. You can also get answers if you scan that QR code you see on your screen, because you can reach someone at Hollis right now. Go ahead and do that. Also follow us on all social media platforms, on X, on Instagram, on Facebook. Great information, great content. You'll see some behind the scenes stuff there as well. Stay with us. We'll take a break, but we'll be back. More crucial information from Jennifer Trombello on The Attorneys right after this.
Thank you for watching The Attorneys each Sunday night, where we come to your living room to provide free legal advice in a confidential, off-air setting. Unfortunately, with the number of calls, texts, and emails that come in during the show, we can't always get to everything. But know this, Hollis Wright is open all week long. You call us at 844-LAW-TALK and we're going to answer your question for free. Thank you for watching The Attorneys, and we look forward to seeing you and talking to you soon.
If this place could talk, it wouldn't. It would sing and celebrate all of our stories of addiction recovery, victory, and community. This is Bradford Health Services. It all changes here.
Welcome back to The Attorneys. We're wrapping up our informative discussion with Jennifer Trombello as we're talking about divorce and dying. And Jennifer, as I come back, I really want to talk about prenuptial agreements. Can they simplify estate issues in either divorce or death, since we're talking divorce and dying?
Absolutely. So they are scrutinized by the court, so you will need to make sure that they are done with the proper formalities under the law, that there is no fraud or duress to be married or to stay married in the case of a postnup. And so there's certain categories that have to be followed. The most important one actually is you must disclose all of your assets to the other spouse. If you leave things out, that could be considered fraud if you're not giving them all of the assets involved.
When do you see postnuptials, after someone gets married, they reach a postnuptial agreement or contract to split certain things up? Those have to be scrutinized by the courts even more than prenups, I would think. When do you see those most often? Is it marrying later in life? Like when do the postnuptials come into play?
Yes, marrying later in life, or people will somewhat rush into their marriage and just really didn't have the time for the attorneys to get everything buttoned up. Because there can be negotiations back and forth on these prenuptial and postnuptial agreements. So if it's done within a reasonable time after the marriage, obviously you have the consideration of being married helps with that contract.
What do you see most often come into your office in this realm of death and divorce? Like what are you seeing? What issues do you see most often?
So what I see, it has to do with the blended families, either people wanting to make sure that their portion and their share is being distributed to their descendants as best as they can.
I see a lot in wrongful death related cases where someone did not have a will. The impact that can have on the distribution to certain heirs, and there may be estranged children's, there may be a circumstance where someone is still physically or is legally married, but they have been estranged from a spouse for 6 years, and the impact that the wrongful death statute and intestate distribution, which is a legal term, but it means the state defines how your resources are allocated if you don't have a will, how it can impact a family. And so what Jennifer's talking about, I think, is some really important stuff, is to make sure that you've got the planning down. One of the questions I want to ask you a little bit about life insurance proceeds and death, as it relates to the Alabama code, it sounds like we have some code sections that help define, if you will, related to what happens if you pass away and you've been divorced but you pass away, and are there statutes that impact what presumptions someone has as to whether life insurance still goes to an ex-spouse?
Yes, sir. So that is actually Alabama Code 30-4-17, which, as we stated earlier, provides for a will, and it will effectively revoke a person, an ex-spouse named in a will, as beneficiary. And subsection paragraph H is what is very specific as to life insurance policies and those beneficiaries and when that status is revoked.
Yeah, and this is a shining example of why, if you have these issues and you want to still provide for an ex-spouse, or you want to make sure you provide for an ex-spouse who may have custody of your minor children, you want to go to someone like Jennifer to make sure that you're doing it the correct way, so you don't accidentally make a mistake and not provide them benefits that they've needed.
And Jennifer's been talking about divorce and dying. I'm wondering, what role does power of attorney play during a divorce?
Yes, so power of attorney, it depends on each individual life insurance company what they are willing to accept as far as changing of those beneficiary statuses. But 30-4-17 does state that if, say, a person gets divorced and then they do not change the beneficiary status, they continue to make those policy payments but never update that beneficiary, they are not entitled to that. If it is an older policy and it can be shown that they just simply neglected to update the information, then that ex-spouse is not going to be entitled to the policy.
All right, so answer this. That's a great point, and I hear that. But what does the insurance company do? They've got to throw their hands up and be like, all right, hold on. Who are we supposed to pay this out to? How is that? Does the court get involved? What happens at that stage? How does an insurance company know what to do at that stage?
So most life insurance companies will ask for a copy of that marital settlement agreement, and they have legal departments, and they will review it on their own. They will then make the decision whether they can pay those funds or not. A lot of times they will just reserve it and say, we cannot pay it out to the named beneficiary on the form, either because it was waived in a settlement agreement or some of those things under 30-4-17, and they will pay it into the estate. They will just let it revert back to the estate of the deceased person.
Well, and one of the mistakes there is, if it goes into the estate, it could be subject to bills owed by the estate, whereas if it was properly set up as a beneficiary distribution at the time of death, it flows outside the estate and does not get subject to the creditors that someone has that they have to pay on their bills. So, again, this is a shining example of why you want someone like Jennifer to evaluate all of this stuff for you to make sure you're doing it the right way.
So, Jennifer,
great job, by the way.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thank you for sharing what was really some valuable information on a very crucial but sensitive topic that we have with divorce and dying. Of course, we want to remind you to stay informed and stay protected. All you have to do is watch The Attorneys. We're back next week, same place, same time. We'll see you then.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.